Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is the time scheduled in docket number 21-999-01 for a technical conference regarding Rocky Mountain Power's annual business update. My name is Jacob Richardson. I am the PSC's facilitator for this conference. As stated in our January 12th, 2021 public notice in this docket, pursuant to Utah Code Title 52, Chapter 4, Section 207, the PSC chair has made a written determination that due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the continued risk of transmission in Utah, an anchor location would provide a substantial risk to the health and safety for those who may be present at the anchor location. And for the benefit of all who are participating in this technical conference, we ask that if you are not speaking, that you please mute your connection. We'll now turn the time over to Rocky Mountain Power for the presentation. Thank you.
Joel, we can't hear you.
How's that?
We can hear you now.
Oh,
Good.
okay. All right. These don't always work with Google Meets, but okay. Well, thank you. I'm Joelle Stewart with Rocky Mountain Power, Vice President of Regulation. And Janice Abbas sent the slide deck around last Friday. I don't know if it'd be probably helpful if we present that. I don't know if the commission wants to do that or if we should do that. I think we can figure out how to do that if that's best.
Yeah, this is Carol Revelt. Yeah, that would be great if you could share it. Otherwise, for people who are interested, it's on the commission website, and we did circulate it to the normal PSC distribution list.
Okay. I'll try present now. Okay. I can't see it, but can you guys see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. All right. So I want to introduce the folks we'll have on the call. It's not a long agenda, but since we just had a rate case, there aren't quite as many items as I think we would normally have, so we didn't want to be repetitive. So we're just trying to touch on some of the things that you wouldn't have otherwise seen in the rate case. Gary Hogeveen, our CEO and Vice President, our CEO and President, is actually just I am me. He is still on a call with the governor of Wyoming, so he's going to be a little bit late. So I'm probably going to switch the slide deck a bit, and we'll probably start with I think, is it you, Joe, who is going to kick it off, or Paul?
Yeah, Paul and I are going to tag team it here.
Okay, Joe Horner is our Senior Vice President of Regional Grid Solutions, and Paul Wood is our Director of Portfolio Optimization. And they're going to talk about some of the regional issues, in particular the recent market issues that occurred in August and then this year in the market. Paul will cover those, and then Joe will talk about the regional efforts with the Northwest Power Pool resource adequacy. And then I'm just going to do a regulatory update of kind of what we see coming down the pike. And then hopefully by then, Gary will join us and we'll come back to his slides. So I'm going to move. I do want to know, we are open to questions along the way. You know, we're happy to have this as a conversation, not just a let us speak to you kind of event. So I will jump to skip Gary's stuff and turn it over to Joe and Paul.
Great. Thanks, Joelle. Thanks, everyone. we wanted to start this off with some of the kind of recent events in the energy market in the West and in what we saw in ERCOT in February, and give a little bit of background of what happened there. We continue to see, more grid stressed events, which is really indicating a shortage of capacity that's out there, that energy is becoming harder to find during peak periods. So we wanted to highlight a couple of these recent events. And even though they get a lot of media attention, there's still a lot of close calls that occur even when we're under kind of normal peak conditions. And largely due to the resource and market diversity across Pacific Corp system, we're able to manage through these with little impact. And Paul will talk a little bit about that as we go through this. But that said, even leading up to what happened last summer in CAISO and what we saw in ERCOT in February, over the last few years, we've been seeing periods, especially in the summer and winter peaks, where the market is really tight. We're seeing price spikes that we hadn't seen since the energy crisis levels back in 2000 and 2001, and a lot of folks are wanting to kind of get ahead of this and avert any sort of disaster. So about 18 months ago, the Northwest Power Pool initiated a resource adequacy initiative amongst its members to try and develop a standard that we could all abide by, that would help alleviate, some of these potential shortfalls. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I'll turn it over to Paul and let him kind of walk through what happened in California last summer, what happened in ERCOT, and then just how we kind of managed through all that. So Paul, to take it away.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Paul Wood, and I work for under Joe in the Energy Supply Management Group here in Portland. We oversee the entire company's generating facilities. I oversee the electricity traders and the natural gas traders. What I wanted to touch on a little bit briefly today, as Joe mentioned, were two kind of stressful events that's occurred in the last not quite a year. And to start with, on that first slide here, is touch upon this past summer of 2020 and some of the issues and stresses that the market incurred back in August. So in the week of August 14th, 2020, the West was under an extreme temperature deviations much above normal. There was a great fire risk across the West. The concern there is that it threatens the transmission lines across multiple states in the West, as well as by the time you get to August, there was a low hydro level situation in many states, particularly in the Southwest and also Southern California. Also afflicting that week of August 14th was a number of unplanned outages in the state of California at critical times. The other thing that was impacting kind of this perfect storm event was a lower than forecasted wind output, most notable during the critical hours late in the day as we're coming on the evening peak. In addition, there was unexpected cloud cover that was impacting the solar generation. That's really become much more prevalent in the Southwest and in particular in Rocky Mountain Power in the state of Utah. On August 14th and August 15th of 2020, California actually initiated rolling blackouts, something that hadn't happened in almost 20 years. As Joe mentioned, the energy crisis back in 2020 and 2021. As California described this event they pointed to two particular issues at hand. One was what they called a heat storm event that affected a number of states in the Southwest, again, in particular, California, as well as California pointed to insufficient resources that they can rely on as the solar hours are starting to go down. The solar production is starting to go down as sunset is happening, yet the load is still increasing as people are coming home from work, turning on air conditioners in their house, and having those resources idle to ramp up to meet that additional demand. So that was the summer event back in August of 2020. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. The next event was back in February of this year, 2020. As Joe mentioned, it was in ERCOT. Basically, the state of Texas is primarily controlled by ERCOT. What happened here is another, extreme weather event. In this case, it was the winter. Starting in February 14th, which was a Sunday, the ERCOT, which is the entity that kind of manages the state of Texas and their energy needs, recognized that there was a very extreme winter event going to happen. By Sunday evening, the freezing precipitation had started, and it impacted the power lines. And at that point, they hit a new winter peak of 69,000 megawatts. During that next week, Sunday the 14th, 15th, and 16th, ERCOT achieved their highest, they had their highest incident of power outages on their grid. Almost 50% of their 52,000 megawatts of generation was offline due to this extreme weather event. It caused the grid operator also to start initiating rolling blackouts in the state of Texas. ERCOT manages about 90% of the state's grid. On February 17th, 61% of the energy resources that were provided by natural gas, coal, and nuclear power were all impacted by this extreme winter event, primarily because of those cold temperatures impacting the cooling water that is used in those three resources that caused the strain. Did someone have a question?
If I could jump in, do you mind?
Yeah, of course.
Joel had said feel free to jump in, so if that's okay.
Sure.
And I'm looking ahead to your next slide, which looks like you're going to address some of this, but I know this is a tough question to ask in a typical day, but if you take a typical summer peak day on the PacifiCorp system, how much of PacifiCorp's system power needs are provided in ways other than PacifiCorp's own generation and long-term contracts for purchase? So how much of the system need has to be provided by spot purchases that isn't procured through either long-term contracts or your own generation on say an average hot day in the summer?
Sure. I think on average, the company has sufficient resources and sufficient diversity across its system to accommodate normal summer demand on its system. We do make economic decisions to procure from the market when it makes economic sense. However, there are cases when we do have unit outages, unplanned unit outages, that we may have to defer to the market for some purchases.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit to that, Paul, what we try to do, Thad, when we set up, for the summer and winter peaks is not have to rely on any short-term purchases. But again, there's a lot of variables there that will push us out into the market from time to time, being, as Paul mentioned, any unplanned outages. But we typically like to be set up, with an N-1, N-2 condition, that if we were to lose a plant or two for 2 or 3 days, or maybe possibly typically for a tube leak on some of the thermal plants, that we don't have to do that. But a lot of times, the load will come in heavier than the forecast, or the variable generation will come in lower than the forecast, and we'll have to be out in the spot market purchasing. But at times, based on peak load, that could be as high as 10 or 15%. For a given hour.
Thank you. That's a very thorough answer to my question. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Welcome.
All right. Thanks. Joel, maybe we could go to the next slide. So this kind of dovetails nicely with the last question, and it talks specifically about Pacificor and Rocky Mountain Power. We're fortunate to have a very diverse system between the two BAs, the Rocky Mountain Power area, as well as the Pacific Northwest geographic area. There's diversity in load between those two BAs that allows us to move our resources back and forth between those BAs based on the economics. In addition, there's diversity in the generation portfolio between the two BAs. We have a fair amount of hydro in the Northwest that we're able to utilize in the Rocky Mountain Power area. Rocky Mountain Power area in the summertime when they're peaking, less so in the Northwest. We, for the most part, we have a mild climate here, and so we're able to move resources back and forth. The other point about that diversity is, we're constantly looking at our resources between the two BAs, Rocky Mountain Power and the Pacific Northwest. We're looking at the market and really economically dispatching our resources into the market, as well as when it makes more sense to buy from the market, we'll do that to help benefit all of our customers within the company. As Joe mentioned, we do a fair amount of proactively hedging into the future to meet our system needs. In the summertime, Rocky Mountain Power is peaking, and in the Northwest, we peak in the wintertime. So having those two offsetting, peaks really helps us leverage the diversity of our generation and resources.
Paul, this is Chris Parker out at the Division of Public Utilities. To that last point, am I correct? I think I remember seeing something showing that the Northwest's winter peak or summer peak is getting closer to its winter peak. And I don't remember if that's like a net position or if that's just raw numbers. Is that a trend that you're seeing, or am I misremembering?
No, I mean, if you look at the peak hour, that single hour, while still not as high as our winter peak, the summer peak can get, pretty high. It just depends on, the day, the hour, and just how things kind of line out.
Yeah, Chris, you're seeing the trend correctly. I think that we're seeing, a handful of utilities. I believe Avista over in Eastern Washington is realizing a summer peak over their winter peak. I think Portland General Electric here in Portland is also seeing higher summer peak than winter peaks.
Thanks.
Yeah. Just
before we
start,
leave,
go ahead, Artie.
Thank you. How does the transmission capacity or constraints affect the ability of Pacificor to meet its loads on the east and west. And I'm primarily talking about the transfer capability between the east and the west.
Yeah.
So how does that correlate with the winter peaks and the summer peaks for the two sides of the system?
Well, that transmission between Rocky Mountain Power and the Pacific Northwest is year round. So we're able to optimize that transmission based on the economics of the two separate PAs, whether it's the Pacific Northwest or the Rocky Mountain Power area. You'll in general in the wintertime, we're moving energy from Rocky Mountain Power to the Northwest, and in the summertime, we're moving the energy from the Northwest to Rocky Mountain Power. To meet our customer obligations.
Artie, while that transmission is predominantly east to west flow, because Jim Bridger plant can also be moved into PACE, it really acts as virtual transmission from west to east, and that it helps out a lot in the summertime to meet the PAC East loads, where we're able to move Bridger energy and then buy at lower cost in the Northwest markets for energy. So it really is a great tool to have and be able to kind of use this virtual transmission to help meet the PACE East loads, the PAC East loads.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So the last point here is looking at that summer event that we just had in August of 2020. The Southwest prices really were stressed. Palo Verde heavy load prices got as high as $1,400. You can also see the next point there is the system. We had a system coincidental peak load between PACE and PAC West. The PACE load, system load hit 10,600 megawatts on hour 15. And you can see the PAC West peak load was 3,400 megawatts on that hour. In the winter, this past winter, February 17th, 2021, mid-sea heavy load prices got to $191. Palo Verde got to $375. The system peak at that time was around 7,800 megs, and you can see the load in the PAC West was 3,100 megs. So, like Joe was mentioning, in your trend, you're recalling, they're definitely coming together as winter events are more cool. Any other questions about those two? Okay.
Not about those two. This is Artie again. I don't know where we're going here, so I don't know if this might be the right time or the wrong time. But talking about emergency situations or conditions, the governor has declared that an emergency water conditions in the state, and so I've been wondering how water limitations, or if PacifiCorp has heard of any water limitations that will affect the operations of any of its plants around the state.
We are not aware of any at this moment, Artie.
I mean, the snowpack in the Northwest is a pretty good year. It's about 92% of average. So, for the most part, the Northwest is in a good position.
But I think, Artie, you were referencing the state of Utah specifically.
Yeah, in particular, the state of Utah. I mean, we have several gas plants around the state and coal plants. And to be honest, I'm not sure which ones are and are not water cooled off the top of my head. But that's what I was wondering, is if there's been any talk, or what are the contingencies if there are water restrictions that affect the operations of the plants?
Yeah, obviously, if there were, the plants would have to be derated. because for the most part, I believe they all use water cooling, and or to a certain extent, not water cooling, but obviously water for the steam generation. But I think for the most part, they're air cooled, most of the plants. But we'll definitely follow up on that. We'll take that back. I just hadn't heard that, and none of the plants have raised it as a concern yet.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Joe to finish up.
So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the the media grabs onto the rolling blackouts, but this has been an issue all along for the power pool folks in trying to figure out how to head this off. So we are, hold on, just wrapping up the preliminary design and going into the detailed design of an RA program. Let's see, I got some notes here I had from Mike. I'm filling in for Mike Wilding, who's been our lead on the RA program. So anyway, we're working on the implementation phase right now, and that should be starting mid this year and continuing on for the next couple of years. And the details haven't been worked out, but we're hoping by mid 2022 or early 2023 that we will be in a state of what's called a forward showing period, where you have to show that you're resource adequate for both the winter and the summer peaking periods. And you have to show that 7 months in advance of that period. And within that 7 months, you have what's called a cure period, that if you're not resource adequate, you have a period of time to be able to correct your deficiency. So those details are being worked out and should be done here in the next year or so. And then the other component of this is the FERC oversight. And it's likely that FERC will find the program to be within its jurisdiction to regulate the sales of electric energy for resale and interstate commerce, just because the power pool members are across a diverse states, and FERC would have oversight of that. So, once we go into that binding forward showing period, that's when, we'll have the FERC oversight in this. So again, a lot of the detail work is still being worked on, but we're hoping to have a program up and running probably, hopefully mid next year or early 2023. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions on the RA timeline.
You had a second slide on that. I didn't know when to turn to it. So
okay.
The next steps.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions on the timeline, so the next step, as I mentioned, continue to work on the detailed design. The other issue is agreeing on a governance structure. There's been a lot of work in the initial design to develop a governance structure. It's looking like it's going to go to more of an independent board oversight with sort of a market assessment committee structure as well. I know that the group, there's subcommittees that are working on stakeholder engagement. I believe they're developing a presentation specifically for the state regulatory commissions, and there should be some outreach, to you folks and other state commissions over the next few months by that group. So it continues to move along. Been a lot of work there. We really are believing that this is something that we need to have across the West. Try and avert any of these reliability events that we've seen recently. So hopefully, in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll have more of the details worked out and an idea of when we can go live with the program. So, Joelle, that's all we really had on the RA and the market stuff today. If there's no questions, I guess we can turn it back over to you and Gary.
I've got a quick one. This is Chris Parker, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I'm a little unclear, and I should be more clear because I participate in Northern Grid stuff, but what's the interface and relationship between Northwest Power Pool and Northern Grid? I know they have some of the same staff members, and I know, of course, Northern Grid is sort of strictly transmission planning, but how does the Northwest Power Pool interface with that on a routine basis?
Chris, I don't really think that they interface on a routine basis. I mean, as you mentioned, you had it right. Northern Grid is a transmission planning entity, where the Northwest Power Pool is a reserve sharing entity. So there's not a lot of what I would call daily interaction. Obviously they probably compare notes and talk, but they're really kind of two separate functions. And they may overlap a little bit in terms of the transmission that is utilized when reserve sharing is called upon amongst the entities. But it's not that they interact on a daily basis.
And I guess that's kind of where I was going with it. Is that and again, I could be wrong, but the trends I see suggest that sort of relationship between those two functions is going to become more and more important as we rely on moving stuff around a lot more, I think, to meet resource adequacy goals. I don't know. I could be wrong, though.
No, I think you're on the right track. Transmission is really key to being able to move the energy around, and the constraints are always problematic. So there will be more coordination between the planning entities and the operational entities. I think you're on the right track.
Okay, if there's no more questions on that, I'm going to go back up. Gary has joined us, and back to the top, and Gary's.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for being a bit late. I was on a separate call that ran a bit long. I tried to get off as soon as I could. Happy to be here now. So let's see. Let's start with just a little bit of update on some news items, if you will, starting with some coal plant closure announcements. These are non-PacifiCorp operated coal plants, as you're aware, in Craig, Colorado, Hayden, Colorado. Starting first with Craig, there was an announcement made in 2020, last year, that we would close Unit 1 at the end of 2025 and Unit 2 at the end of 2028. Again, these are units that are operated by Tri-State, and we have some nominal 19%-ish ownership of both 1 and 2. So those announcements were made. We will be closing at those times. And then Hayden, kind of consequently, in January of this year, just a few months ago, the owners made a joint announcement that Unit 1 would retire in 28 and Unit 2 in 27. And again, those units are operated by Xcel Energy, and we own 24, just over 24 and 12% respectively. So those, of course, are in addition to the Cholla Unit 4 that we did announce and then did shut down at the end of 2020, and then 7-8 years ago had closed Carbon. So those are the coal plant closures that we have announced and have effectuated. I'll just pause. If we have any questions, please ring out, raise your hand, whatever. Hearing none, seeing none, I'll move on to a little bit of news around PacifiCorp leadership changes. And this, in large part, pertains to the Pacific Power Group and specifically transmission, which is up in, reports up through Stefan at PAC Power. Scott Bolton, who had responsibility primarily for government relations and customer solutions, has accepted a new role where he will be focusing exclusively on transmission development. There's just a lot of transmission need, both within our service territory and around places where we interconnect throughout the West. So we see a lot of opportunity, both in the gateway project space to finish that, monetize it, commercialize it, get that done, and are really asking Scott to do that work as well as look kind of, like I said, kind of around other territories and see what, again, contiguous to our facilities, but maybe not part of Gateway yet. See what else might be available or interesting or in need of development. So as part of that, Scott's responsibilities on the government affairs have been reassigned to Ryan Flynn, who's a general counsel currently at Pacific Power, and then his customer solutions regional business manager role that he was leading. Those responsibilities have moved to Etta Lockey, who is our vice president of regulatory up in Pacific Power. So those are the kind of some big changes that we had just announced recently within the last month or so. I just wanted to highlight those. And again, we do see a lot of opportunity in transmission development going forward. Again, please, if you have any questions, feel free to just chime in. And then the last thing here, yeah, please. Yep.
Jerry, this is Artie. When you say opportunities, and I think you said monetize and commercialize transmission, is this a different business model for Pacific Core? Or is this, you're still talking about regulatory assets and rate base, et cetera?
Yep. Well, certainly that's the thought. We're open to exploring other ideas with folks maybe that might have different ideas, and Scott will have those discussions. I don't have a predetermined set. No, we're talking about something, non-Pacific Corp rate base. Yeah, I do suspect these would all be of interest to our customers. These would save money for customers. But to the extent that there was something else available and other folks had an idea, we'd listen and obviously think about something different if that happened. But no, I would say in large part we're talking about again, kind of gateway stuff, and then if there's anything new that's not currently in gateway, but again would be good for Pacific Corp customers.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. No, good. Thanks for the clarification. The last bullet here is really around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is, I think, kind of consistent with businesses around the country. We are, really since last, summer and the George Floyd, and I think kind of a little bit of a American wake up to the issue, an evolution. Let's say it certainly wasn't any set thing, but DEI has become more important to us, certainly, at Berkshire Hathaway Energy and at Pacific Corp. At BHE, Berkshire Hathaway, we've appointed a chief diversity officer. Her name is Darla Zink. She's out of our pipeline business in Omaha. And then we've assigned 3 folks to be responsible at Pacific Corp to essentially make sure that we are doing what we need to be doing for diversity, equity, inclusion. So we're taking that very seriously. We just finished a survey of all of our employees to find out how they're feeling, what do they think about this, what should we be doing, and we'll be following up on that and going forward. So a very intentional effort for us. No questions. Let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, Joelle. So let's have a little bit of a legislative update. 'Tis the season. Most of our 3 states, Wyoming is wrapping up their session in 2 days, Wednesday. Utah is wrapped up, of course, and Idaho as well. So just real briefly, in Utah, and again, I don't think any of this is new, late-breaking news. I think these are all well understood. HB 32 is energy balancing account, really kind of putting ourselves back to the place where we thought we were on interim rates, being able to effectuate interim rates. Again, I don't think there's too much there worth talking about that we're not. HB 141 wasn't our bill. It didn't have anything to do with us necessarily. We did find it interesting and supported the direction it went. In essence, it was an argument, I think, between SESD and some munis in southern Utah County, where there was some efforts to annex by certain municipals that were, if you will, cherry picking the good accounts and not taking everything within the new annexed service territory. So this specifically calls out and requires if a municipality is annexing service territory, they are to take all of the obligation to serve and all the customers within that service territory that they've annexed. So seems to make sense. HB 388 really is just a policy action item that clarifies that the state of Utah is supportive of reliability and including certain types of generation, including pumped hydro and hydrogen, as well as other more reliable resources. So nothing, again, with a whole lot of teeth, but it did certainly state the preference in the policy of the state of Utah. Moving on to Wyoming, really this is where the lion's share of the action happened this spring and is happening for 2 more days in our service territory. A number of bills, as you can see there, the bold ones are the ones that are going forward, and I'll focus my attention on those and maybe have another comment at the end on some things that didn't happen. But first with Senate File 136, this does require the PSC to consider socioeconomic factors in rate making. I wouldn't say requires. It is actually, the language says may, it doesn't say shall, but it allows the Wyoming PSC to consider socioeconomic factors in rate making. We were opposed to this. We think it has some unintended consequence, potential things that we don't necessarily think would be in our customers' best interest, but it is going forward, and we do believe it will likely pass. I think it has one remaining. Actually, I think that one already did pass. HB 166 has one more vote in the Senate to pass. 166 again doesn't do a lot. It's essentially status quo. It spells out a rebuttable presumption against early coal plants unless that retiring those coal plants would be in the customers, would save customers money, would be economically advantaged for customers. That's pretty much our understanding of the requirements already. There was a excuse me. No, I think that got it. There was an effort to make it significant savings, and we did get rid of that amendment. In an amendment, we got rid of the word significant. We think that was very difficult to figure out what it meant, to be honest. So that is, like I said, going forward, does have one remaining vote. The other one, HB 207. Yeah, please.
Sorry to interrupt again.
No, fine.
That HB 166, is that in addition to the previous legislation that directed Pacificor or others to try to sell plants before they close them?
Yeah, that is listed below just for reference.
Oh, okay, okay.
SF 150, that's a fine, good clarification, Artie. 159 does still stand. That was passed 2 years ago. That requires us to make a good faith effort to sell a coal unit if it is officially announced for retirement. So that process does still continue. The Wyoming PSC is in the middle of developing requirements for us to follow. 159 as well as HB 200. While I'm here, talk about that. Last year, the legislature passed HB 200, which requires a low carbon standard, which essentially requires us to install carbon capture technology. If we should close a plant, we have to install carbon capture up to a certain percent that the commission is still clarifying in their rules. But both of those laws are still laws, and we have to continue to follow those. Then just finishing out the bold ones, House Bill 207 allocates $1.2 million to fund litigation against other states that are looking to shut down coal or prevent coal from being used. So read Oregon and Washington if you'd like into that bill. I don't know exactly what it means, who's going to initiate that litigation. We haven't seen anybody raise their hands yet and say they would do that on behalf of the state, but that is what the 207 does. Just one, I think at least one comment here. I know that we have all been interested in what might be happening on Wyoming wind tax. And I wanted to point out that it continues to not get passed. Any bill that might come up has not actually seen the floor, has not passed out of committee yet. And that trend continues, and there's been dozens of tries over the last dozens of years that you're more than likely aware of. The effort this year failed with a 2-7 vote in the committee to kill it, and which is the most the strongest defeat yet. So the trend there is still helpful and is good that we don't see real support for introducing a stronger wind tax in Wyoming than the current $1 per megawatt hour. So I thought that was interesting and made note. I would also just maybe in passing note that all the rest of these House bills they were all House bills, but the 248, 258, for example, really 258, 259 these were bills that had pretty significant hammers that could take away our CPCN and service territory rights to serve our territory in Wyoming if we didn't do things that they wanted to keep the coal industry alive. For example, if we announced any coal retirements and so forth. So those were pretty harsh, and they didn't make it out of committee either. And they were frankly largely run by a group looking to do some carbon capture and sequestration for their oil fields, EOR, enhanced oil recovery, out of near Glen Rock, Wyoming. So those didn't go anywhere, but they were pretty ugly, and they caused a lot of fighting, frankly, in committee. So a lot going on in Wyoming, as I said, the last 2 days. It will conclude in 2 days, and we do think those 3 that are bold will pass. The first one has already. I'll stop there. Idaho, really no major bills to really talk about. So any questions or comments around legislative update?
Gary, this is Dave Clark.
Commissioner.
Thanks for very interesting and useful presentation. And I certainly had noticed that your outline didn't include the subject of wind tax and your sense of the current political winds. Sorry for the pun, but I really appreciate you addressing that in the detail that you did. I just want to confirm for you that it's, remains a matter of intense interest. And so thank you. Yep.
No, it in fact was your comments in some of our proceedings that caused me to rethink that and add it here verbally. And it was a good outcome, frankly, in the committee. And that I won't say it won't ever come up again. I'm certain that it probably will in some form, but I do think that there is a pretty strong tide against a Wyoming wind tax. So,
thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I think last I have a little slide here on reliability, service quality, SAIDI, and safety and so forth. Again, the trend continues to be favorable. We will continue the efforts there to improve reliability, reduce outages, durations, and frequency. 2020 was our best performance ever, and we will continue to target that for 2021. Again, best performance ever. we're having a little bit of a rough start, to be honest, with some of the outages that we've had recently. But we're hopeful that it's certainly not giving up on our goal for this year. We certainly think it's attainable. I would note in 2020, it was our best performance ever. However, two very big asterisks and major events that are excluded in these graphs, of course, are the March earthquake, and honestly, the response there was very favorable. I'm particularly proud of the group able to get from 75,000 outages that morning at 7:09 to by 10:30, pretty much everybody buttoned back up. September windstorm was a bit harder to respond. Equally proud of the effort, but what was required there was, again, quite a bit longer. It took us 7 days really to get everybody back. We were at 240,000 out, which is just remarkable. And the damage done to our system, as well as just the trees around the city, was amazing. But really, we need to note those two large asterisks. But the performance was outstanding by the team. And again, kind of hand in glove with this is our efforts on wildfire. We are investing a lot of money into the wildfire mitigation plan that we've outlined and filed with yourselves, and that you have approved, and was laid out in a separate state bill. But those efforts will continue to have secondary benefits for reliability as we continue to harden the system, particularly around the fire high consequence areas. But those improvements will pay dividends throughout our service territory. So we'll continue those efforts into this spring. We are right now, and we'll continue those into the summer. I think that's all I have, Joelle. But if any other questions from anyone? If not, I'll kick it back to Joelle.
All right. So lastly, just sort of the outlook of what we're seeing for regulatory filings. This is by no means inclusive of every potential filing. These were the sort of the big ones we thought of at the top of our heads. And I forgot to introduce Janice Saba, but I think most of you know her, our regulatory affairs manager for Utah. Two items on here, though, two items that aren't on here that are not forgotten. We just haven't had a chance to kind of regroup and figure out the timing for that kind of are a fallout from the rate case. And one is the subscriber solar expansion pilot. We had committed to, before we refile that, to meeting with parties. So that is still on our to-do list. So hopefully we'll see that later this year. And then also we had flagged that without a two-step rate change, seeking a major plan addition. So we're still figuring out the potential option for a major plan addition. So those may be filed later this year. But what we have here, wildfire, Gary just touched on that. So we did not touch on wildfire in this deck because you've seen our wildfire plan and approved it. Our first compliance report we will be filing in June. Electric vehicle program filing. So this comes from legislation last year. We are a little bit further behind on it than we had hoped to be at this point. We had hoped to file earlier this year, but the key personnel working on the filing has had an extended absence. And so it's still in development, and we should hopefully have that together to be filed. I know we have some commitments to meet with parties ahead of time, kind of informally. And so hopefully over the next couple months, that will start moving again when he is back, able to be back in the office working on that program. The Community Renewable Energy Plan, this was HB 411 that you already did the rulemaking for. So kind of to tell you where we're at with that. So the communities have been meeting for about the past year amongst themselves, just working through their own governance structure. They are nearing the end of that, is our understanding. And I don't know if any of them are actually on. I didn't notice. but they are nearing the end of that. We're going to start meeting in earnest with them, hopefully in the next couple of months, working out a work plan to get through the negotiations for what that agreement would look like. So that I know they're optimistic that we may have that negotiated and worked through by the end of the year. We'll see. There's a lot of details to work through, but that is going to start in earnest. And as we work through the work plan to start with, looking at when to do outreach with the regulatory agencies, the division and the office, other interested parties as we work through different items. That will certainly be a part of it. All source RFP. So the RFP that was issued to the market last July, I believe, and we received the bids in August. We went to an initial shortlist in October, and then they've been doing the cluster study for the interconnection cost for the past 6 months, it seems like. The cluster study results are going to be final and published coming up here next week, actually. I think it's April 15th. At that point, bidders will have about a week, I believe, to April 22nd to refine their bids, those that were in the initial shortlist. And then at that point, once we have refined bids, they'll be doing a final shortlist. I know we don't have any other specific filings coming out of the RFP itself for Utah, but in Oregon, there is another action step of approval where they have to go get approval for the final shortlist. I imagine there will be a point where there will be a public meeting to kind of highlight what the outcome of that shortlist is, because that will then key off potentially subsequent filings in Utah later this year. What we anticipate is a CPCN filing for Gateway South will be necessary for Utah. We'll also have to consider whether or not a significant energy resource decision will be necessary or will be triggered, and then potentially a voluntary, but we'll just wait and see. So expect to be talking with parties after we get that final shortlist and know what are the next steps and what are the next filings that we'll need to initiate later this year. MSP reassignment filing. That is anticipated for next year, February 2022. In the meantime, we have regular meetings ongoing on MSP with parties to work through the kind of planning regime that would be used for the post-interim period that will then be used for the potential reassignment filings of any of the plants. And then lastly, Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. So this is not going to be any extensive filing, I anticipate, for Utah. In Utah, we just have to do a notice. But we have filings pending on the transfer, sort of the subsequent agreement that was reached with parties involved in that negotiation with Oregon and California. We have filings pending at FERC, both an application to transfer the license to the Klamath River Restoration Corporation, which will take on the dams and handle decommissioning and remediation, and then a license to surrender, which would actually be the demolition of the dam. So those are in process at FERC right now. We also have the property disposition filings pending in Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, and California. They're just in process, seem to be on track. No major issues so far have come up. So I anticipate once we get those state disposition approvals and also have the FERC approval for the transfer of the license, at least we'll be making the required notice filing in Utah. So hopefully later this year. And I think that's it for what we had flagged for the regulatory update and for the whole agenda. And that puts us at the end of an hour. So any other questions or comments anybody is interested in making?
Joelle, this is Artie. I do have one question, but I'll let anybody else go before I ask again?
Looks like it's you.
Doesn't look like it, huh? The settlement in the Klamath, there was some discussion. I can't remember who was in that discussion. It might have been with just the division. So let me ask it this way. Does the company anticipate any kind of change to past commission orders here in Utah on Klamath as a result of the new settlement?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that's it. So thanks for your time.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming, and we'd just like to conclude the meeting now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate your presentations.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.